Hey, this is Mike. Welcome to Atomics on a Friday. Thank you for checking out this demo. If you would like, subscribe and like to get more content in the future. 1218-007. It's kind of an easy one to remember, and which I really dig. And Red Canary's bird is constantly asking me questions if I want their MDR report, which, by the way, Paul, is not out yet. All right, so this kind of back up a little bit on the ATH piece. This is the initial blog that Red Canary shipped out for it. Speaking of it, I'll drop that in the chat. And this particular blog highlights the reasoning behind a lot of the content. What's the kind of the purpose of ATH, the project itself. Defining sufficient coverage. Great, ultimately, awesome questions, right off the bat, right? Like, what optics are associated with this technique? And, defenders, even I would assume even on the offensive side, you think about this, right? As you're building something, like, how will somebody find this if we shipped it, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. How common this is actually going to be in an environment. People always find off the wall, like, how I found this extension or I found this thing, and you're like, well, right, but in most places that doesn't actually run. So trying to find the edge cases on the normal stuff, and then how you work back on it, which ties in the MSI piece about all the different directions it can go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know with Atomic Red Team, we've always struggled with showing pass fail or sufficient technique variances or usage with it. And even if you look at I think it was Keith McCammon just shipped a tweet the other day on kind of an online little spreadsheet tracker, and yes or no for detection and whatnot. It's always something that we've struggled with the product, the tool itself. And I know Carrie, one of the Atomic maintainers, she's working on a syslog output for it. So when you run your executions, it'll ship it out to Splunk or whatnot, or a SIM logging place.
Yeah, trying to show coverage versus what's happening in the wild versus every edge case is how good should I feel about this, right? Like, we're good for today, tomorrow, next week is
Yep. Exactly. So initially when the project came out, it was focused on MSHTA, CHM, and PPID spoofing. And speaking of CHM, you mentioned earlier the MSI being kind of like a package and whatnot. And it reminded me of CHM, where I remember when we were working on this harness, you could literally embed anything in there. It's just a bunch of, it's just a container, it's like a zip. And I was just like, yeah, I'm surprised we don't see more of CHM, but at the same time, it's like 1999's calling.
that like a lot of these techniques are like that. When we started getting back into HTA, I pulled out some book from like 98 or 90, something like that. It was like a security book, and it was like, be careful, watch out for HTA. And I was like, I didn't think that 20 years later we'd be like, HTA is back.
Yep. So good. Oh, it's fun. But all right, so I'm going to kill one browser tab because I definitely have too many open today. I'm going to leave the deeper report alone. I'm just going to hop in and jump right into the, how to kind of get started with atomic test harnesses. The obvious thing is there is a wiki page for ATH. Let me just go back here to the top. And to get started is as simple as, getting started on Windows. And it is on the PowerShell gallery. So it's as simple as just copying this little one-liner and dropping it into your terminal shell. It'll install all of them, which is really nice. And if you already had it installed or you downloaded it manually and dropped it into your path, you can load it this way too. If you run into any issues or over time, I think I've ran into this maybe twice, but that's just because my ranges are always very kind of all over the place. And then if you want to see what's all in, what you're playing with, you can see similar to what we saw on the repo itself. There's a bunch of harnesses in here now, and the range is all over. There's a lot of good, awesome things in here. Anytime, I think I tweet this every often, is when the new thing comes out, HTAs or whatever, or CHMs, the new thing being shipped. I always tweet atomic test harnesses, because it's like, hey, if you haven't validated yourself or played with all the variances, this is such a good place to be and good place to play at, because there's just so much in here. All right, I'll try to keep on my regularly scheduled program here. Oh yeah, I know there's so much content. Yeah, so that's the basics of ATH. I do already have it installed, so I'm not going to run through it again. In comparison of what we're going to play with, I wanted to at least show 007 from the Atomic Red Team side. There is, 11 tests in here just for MSIexec. Different variations are in here, like embedded VB script, JScript, a DLL, XE, things like that. So it's really clean. It makes it easy. And then for the options to play in the different variations of it, you can use these input arguments as a way to modify them live. And I think we've shown this a few times in the past. We do our quick one here. 7. Here's all those. And then I'm just going to run. We'll just go with the first one here. You can prompt for those input arguments just with that TACK prompt for input args, and you can tell it where your MSIexec is. So if you copied it or you want to move it or rename it, it's as simple as that. Similar with your MSI file, if you wanted to play with your own or whatever it may be. And then you have this option to change the MSI action. These are also built into the ATH piece, and I'll show that here too. But they do specifically kind of change the way that these are the command line switches that you'll see like on the command line. So the default is always kind of like I for install, which I think comes out to a Q, not a Q, but I think it comes out to I think it's just /I. And again, remember with Atomic, we don't get much validation here. It's just runs. And if you wanted to know what it does, you could do that show details. And now we know. It runs by default the kind of like the quiet run, and then the install. And that's what it would look like if you ran it now. So that's that half. Mike, what about ATH? They came for ATH. The simple method to run it is you already installed it, Invoke-MSI, and this is the default. All harnesses, as far as I know, will have a simple output, simple execution and output built in. So if you just run it, it'll actually just kick this off for you. And this is that validation. Did it work? And there is a true false test success. I mentioned that GUID and what was the script engine and everything like that. It's awesome. Like it's so clean, for validation and whatnot. On your side, Justin, when you work with the customer, do they sometimes ask for a lot of I don't want to say variations, but do they actually want you to hone in on a particular technique, deep down into different variations? I guess I am asking about variations.
So it depends on what side. The red team side, a lot of times they're interested in what we know works and gets by. The purple team side of actually going back and forth, they'll say, hey, what are you guys seeing in the wild for initial code execution techniques that get by this EDR? Okay, let's spend a bunch of time on this file format or this particular branch of techniques. And I think for them, it's using our knowledge of what we know works against the EDRs and things like that to stack that up to where they can get additional coverage. That's a hard thing for a lot of clients because I think that they look at it as we have a sim, we have an EDR, we've mashed things together, we got a bunch of custom rules, like what still works in between, and let's beat up those areas that so maybe they remap HTA so they never open. So like, what are we left with? They'll spend a lot of time on trying to make sure that they close those gaps, and people are getting way better at knowing, what and where those are, and then having a conversation around let's just do a deep dive in this thing. Like what edge cases can you throw at us? What other ways can you run it? Things like that.
From that perspective, do a lot of, I guess that's kind of more purple team in a way, right? Or yeah, and do they share the logic ahead of time, like what they actually look for, and then you guys can like help
So yeah,
tune
so
around?
on the purple team side, they'll definitely share what they already know. That's why it's nice having a defensive team that does consulting and an offensive team that does consulting, because we can see what actually works in the wild, what blue teams think is happening, or what they think is the biggest problem or the biggest gaps, and kind of merge those together. So on the purple team, clients will definitely share the rules they're currently using, put us in councils, walk through things they've seen, share past reports, stuff like that. On the red team side, it's more of, we know you guys do research, we know you have something, let's just try it and validate what we thought was going to work. So we've had clients before that were like, there's no macros in our environment, and then we fish them, and like with a macro like a couple of years ago, right, and that fires, and they're like, we thought we had a control for that, and then they find out through like change management that they're like, oh, we rolled back that fix for like 70% of our user population. So that level of validation is interesting, because you're always assuming that there's no regression in your rule set, so there's no regression in the detections you make, and that tends not to be the case. Somebody might have backed something out because an event happened, and all of a sudden your logs are firing off an alert, for whatever it might be. What else is funny? We've also, on the HTA piece, we've come across clients that are like, oh, HTA is not a big deal to us, and they were hiring like full-time HTA developers at one point, like in the past 6-7 years. So we're like, clearly you guys use these and write them still. So it's interesting seeing different parts of the business not knowing what the rest does, and kind of threading the needle with what detection might work.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a very, it's tricky. At one of my prior orgs, it was a M&A type org, and so we would purchase companies, acquire and all that, and it was very much like that. Once they got on our WAN internally, it was very much kind of like Wild West. Like certain groups had different policies versus others. Large companies were, better off in certain type of, policies of prevention, and then others were just, 200 employees startup making things work, right? And yeah,
We run
we had
into
some
a
field.
lot. The big piece there is like, a client will call us and want a red team and say they're maybe like a hedge fund or something, and they're small, but they have a good security budget. They have like 400 employees. Like that company is usually multiples harder to break into than, let's say, like a Fortune 50, because of what you mentioned. It's like all the levels of management, all the legacy, all the things to manage. And it's really hard to tell people, hey, like your small company might need more time than this giant company, even though the security staff from one might be, 100 security people on a whole floor at one place and 4 at the other. A lot of times the places that have 4 are running, like Sysmon, like they have application allow listing in place, like all of those things. And then they're like, oh, I don't understand why everybody does this. And you're like, if you try rolling that out at any giant company, you're going to very quickly figure out politics and how that's half the job or more than the job, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with any kind of app control, you'll find out fast
Yeah.
how many people want to run everything. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I'm just gonna run the get help examples here on the MSI one. This is obviously with everything with ATH. They do have all these examples built in, and you can kind of see some of the different parameters and whatnot in here. The beauty of this tool is that it is obviously very open source. And if you want to dive into, what is actually going on behind the scenes, Matt and co have done an amazing job with detailing these and showing obviously the parameters here at the beginning. And then as you kind of go down, kind of, I guess in a way where I hang out is I'm really curious about the different parameter settings. And because I always see, again, like we saw earlier, with just like the install admin advertise piece, you can change, script, VB script to J script, things like that. All of this is all in here, which is really cool. And if you're just kind of getting started in ATH type stuff, like it's as simple as, take these examples and just kind of ship it and see what happens, see what it looks like.
It's extremely, like, the hardest thing I think blue teams struggle with is trying to come up with the tradecraft for these things. Like, this gives you such a starting point to start, even the basic cases, then fuzzing around. It's not like, hey, I have to go research this technique for, weeks to just replay a single thing. Like the upskilling and knowledge very quickly is a huge piece of this. And that's like the biggest thing we run into is, blue teams are like, what should we focus on? How do we learn this? They're amazing writing detection rules, but like coming up with, the evasions and things like that, even the basic ones of this, is just something that people don't want to invest the time in, and rightfully so. Like you're worried about the output taking, trying to tie it all back in.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. And kind of the neat thing as well about these is, if you, as a lot of defenders do, is, we see the CTI reports, we see that, good example right here. We know that by kind of scouring through like a deeper report, we see the basics right here. We got the /I, we see the /QN, and a lot of logic is just written on look for /I's and /QNs, right? Like maybe it's normal in my environment every day. And you have to do that simple filtering, SCCM, constantly running MSIexec, whatever, you filter out those parent procs and kind of go down the line. And that's where I think a lot of with ATH, it kind of helps us just say like, okay, it's not always /I QNs, and kind of very much just segued myself right into what this looks like in as far as the logging perspective goes. So let me run one more atomic. I'm gonna go back up here to the actual T1218.007. This is just the atomic test side of things. So if you wanted to run all of them, you just power through that one, kicks them all down range. Got all our goodies. And then the hope is that in the last 24 hours, somebody did something, which is a little too much something. So I broke it out into parent proc, parent command line, because there's some things, and then the process name and that process command line data. And what I wanted to show was that, we talked about the /I and the Qs and things like that, and QNs and everything we get from CTI. Here's those variances. And this is the part where it gets tricky with MSIs. What we see in like reports is this may not be always C Windows installer. It's going to be app data local, dropping temp files, and then /Vs. And so like these dash embeddings with random GUIDs and whatnot, like it gets really hard to like generate this type of content. And then if it's embedded with something else and it trampolines not spawning off of MSIexec, I always think about like that stuff as like, if we're not looking for, hopefully we're looking for MSIexec spawning something outside of spawning itself. But like, where did it go? Where did it, cross process type events? Where did it end up going to inject or do something else? And I don't know. How do you, as far as your MSIexecing goes, Justin, what other fun little tricks have you guys kicked off on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, before the show, we talked about this a little bit. It was, you can create directories, you can edit registry settings, and then you can go and, make it install some other signed benign thing. So along the way, you're like, hey, I made an MSI installer that installs putty, whatever it might be, but it set some registry key that then let me do something else. So that was the thing that with talking about this was this can go in so many directions that it's like, that's why you're seeing MSI pop up. It's such a common thing. And then it's which behavior am I tracking down? Which is good, which is common. The extra behaviors you can do where you can like do like post install activity of run JScript or VB script. It's like, this is packaging up, a whole pile of tradecraft you've seen into something that is, like you can see in the screen, it's hard to track what direction it's going. So it's another way to reboot things that have already been done, pretty extensively.
From what you've seen, is it outside? So what do you think more common? Do you see like an MSI file like coming in via like an HTML smuggling, or is it like second stage it downloads like through PowerShell and then they run it that way? What do you think more?
So I would probably use this as the pretext of, hey, there's a VPN update or something like that. Like just go straight away to MSI, HTML. But like, I know that seems basic, and that stuff still works. Like on the red team side, we'll do a lot where we call people, SMS text message people first, things like that. When you combine that trust and then like the workflow for like an MSI installer, if you're expecting to install something, it's not like open a Word document, click enable, spin around 3 times, click this content. Like this is an expected behavior that people have been trained to click, run. Hey, it's doing the thing I thought. Walk away. I feel good. So that's a big piece of this, is that it's everybody's installed software. Like everybody who's touched Windows has seen, what that looks like. There's some stuff behind the scenes we've done with MSI too, where do like silent installs out of another tool. We've seen instances where, tradecraft gets caught, using a certain technique. If you wrap that same technique in an MSI, it would break the detections that maybe like an EDR product had, because it just can't seem to handle, hey, we wrote a directory, we wrote another directory, we installed something that was signed by Microsoft. That's cool. We changed some registry keys. Hey, we don't care. And then something else happens, or, schedule tasks and things like that. There's so much you can do. And I think the balancing between, so many things in defense are, is this a good action or a bad action? You're scrambling a number of activities that could be very suspicious or could be completely common. So sticking something in the middle, I think is going to be, keeping MSIs alive for quite some time.
Ooh. I wish you could join.
Got a barge in. Yeah, he's like, hey, why are you not playing Minecraft with me right now? So funny. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's very interesting. It very much, it just reminds me of HTA so much, and I don't know why. I remember a couple times we would catch like a red team. They would begin kind of with the whole like, legal, give us your creds kind of at the end, HTML file, and it would just post out to this website. But inbound, it's just an HTML file coming in, or HTA, and they click it and read the legal doc or whatever it might be, the latest revision to their medical information for the company, and then they post out to that website. Very much reminds me of that. Then the second stage is VPN.
We did a ton of that like in years back, where we would do like HTA surveys, be like, this year for reviewing the company, we want to win an award. Can you guys fill out this survey? And it would be like the first thing would just be a login page or whatever, and then just walk them through. And that behavior, it's expected, or whatever. It closes out, it doesn't run anything. We kind of got into the payload thing after that, where you could do like deserialized payloads and have them load. There was some area there where like depending on how you loaded JScript, you could avoid AMC at one point. There's just there is so much surface there. That's same feeling with this. There's so many directions you can take this that are probably not areas of great coverage right now that are going to get flushed out over time, especially now that you push people off of macros, and people are really big into chaining 75 link files and everything possible under the sun to get to a certain point. So
yep. Yeah, I sent Paul my HTML zip OneNote MSI the other day.
I know.
He's not here.
You see these and you're like, who does this? And you're like, well, it obviously works because it's still happening. And it's just like to see this, and you're like, so you got somebody to go through 7 steps of running this, and you're like, this is really a technical problem. Like people are gonna do whatever you tell them to do. So we need to fix this on our side. It's never gonna be the don't click this thing, or hover over the link as the magic, savior to prevent bad things from happening.
I know my favorite is like, here's the password. You open the HTA, there's the password, and that's so good.
Yeah.
Mount, launch, password. Yeah, it's glorious. Yeah, so this is where this quick one here is this on image loads, event code 7 from Sysmon. I mentioned earlier how my Sysmon config was not configured for this. Very much, a lot of EDRs may limit the amount of mod loads that they collect into their product. And I think it was recent, Elastic showed kind of like the core set that they go for. And I know some other vendors, they do limit the amount that they like would alert on or trigger on, things like that. It's definitely a thing out there. It's extremely voluminous. Like, there's so many mod loads happening. And I mentioned Hunt Naked. Obviously, you would never deploy this Sysmon config in a loaded environment, a real 10,000 endpoint org, because it's just chaos. But I mean, it's awesome for me. Thank you, little tiny computer lab of 3 that I can do this. But in this particular case, you mentioned AMSI, and like, even when we run these particular MSI tests, like, first thing I thought was like, oh, like, it's going to absolutely load up JScript or even like VB. These load up, and AMSI's in here too, and because of PowerShell being spawned and whatnot. And there was another one. I think it was MS Core and MSI-DLL, obviously, for its kind of standard day-to-day. These are really fun to hunt on. And do you see many orgs like dig into these when on an engagement or anything and ask any questions about mod loads? Or
not really. It comes up from time to time, but it's not a super big one. More people are focused on like, they'll be like, oh, we saw your payload import bcrypt or something like that, like on the actual like exe DLL side of like imports that side, but not too much on the hunting side. I know it comes up, but it's noisy. Like you really have to know what's going on because there's so much there.
Yeah, it can be a little much. And I used to love, especially at Red Canary, because we had so much telemetry, like digging into AMSI DLL, loading in like non-standard processes is such a neat way to find that random tradecraft or random applications doing weird things that make no sense.
Yeah, it's like telemetry overload these days. I think that where, defense and offense, like offense for the longest time was, hey, let's just go to this area where there's no coverage, right? Like, oh, there's a scripting language, they can't see into it. Okay, cool. So like Microsoft's been shining lights on all these different areas. And now it's like, okay, in offense, now where is the light, but where is all the noise? And I think that, defenders probably have a leg up now and in the coming years because, we're not collecting telemetry from your entire fleet and then taking it home and saying, all right, let me look at this for a month and decide these are the places to live. Like you could have an MSI file, like you said, like SCCM or something, right? Like you guys allow us that, like there's no alerts, but going into it, I'm not going to know that that's the one MSI exe that you guys fire on a regular basis. So there's some stuff there. And we have clients kind of sometimes tell us those things and they'll say, hey, we have a gap in our coverage because we have to allow this thing. We're just going to tip you off because you might figure that out over some time. So we want to build some deeper controls around it. So, try going down this path. And the collaborative piece has been a lot nicer. It always used to be like, we're not going to tell you anything. And we'd be like, okay, cool. Can we find that out if we send like 2 fishes or talk to someone on the phone? They're like, probably. And we're like, well, let's just make the best use of our time. And, like, we'll be forward with you and share what we're going to try. Let's just, work together and back and forth. And it's definitely kind of changed with red teaming versus years back. They're like, we're telling you nothing, get in here and then get to this. And we would do it. And they'd be like, all right, maybe we should team up on this. So.